Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Modal chords built from notes outside the collection of notes from our analogy notes that are in the ocean. Ocean note chords, people. That's what we'll be building. So get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin', and you need Microsoft Excel for that. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or possibly just follow along building the part of the worksheet that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below, including a very colorful fretboard tab. We may be referring to the example tab, in essence, the answer key. The practice tab has pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting, but if you don't have any of that, that is okay because we'll continue to work in the blank tab where we started from scratch with a blank worksheet, continuing in essence, the blank part of the worksheet, practicing not only our music skills, but our Excel formatting skills as well for formatting's sake. Let's go on over to the example tab to get an idea of what we will be doing. In prior presentations, we wanted to be thinking about the standard formations of the chords that would be in a standard collection of notes. In other words, we're going to be working typically in a 7-note collection. There are 12 collections of 7 notes, and we can then build chords off of each of those 7 points. Those would be the standard chord constructions. Each of those chord constructions can be built in a standardized way, taking every other modal half step. So that means that from each of those nodes, we can have a 3-note chord, a 4-note chord, a 5-note chord, a 6-note chord, and a 7-note chord. So those are going to be the most common types of chord constructions. However, there's going to be some problems that we would like to have an ability to give more information about. That would include, what about the 5 notes that are outside the collection of notes? We might still want to be referring to them as a chord. That's what we'll take a look at this time. We also might have a situation where we're saying, hey, look, I'd like to be more specific about whether or not we're going to be including all 7 notes, for example, in a 7-note collection. Maybe I'm eliminating some of the notes and I want to be more specific and not just like a general, it's a 7-note chord, or this is the first note and the last note, and just take every other note in the middle. Can I be more specific? We'll talk about that later. And we might say, hey, look, I would like to have an inverted chord, or possibly be more specific about the fingering of the chord, say on the fretboard, or which note is going to be the lowest note in the collection of notes. So we might have a 4-note chord, for example, but it's not going to be in standard format with the root of the chord as the lowest note possibly, which could be like an inversion or something like that. How can we identify those? So we'll talk about that. And if we have chords that are normal chords, but I'm adding on another note that is outside the collection of notes, is there a way that I can identify that to give us those variations, more specific formatting for our chord constructions? That's going to be the idea here. So we'll go back to the blank tab. And what we've done before is we basically numbered out our musical alphabet. We gave the letters for the musical alphabet, also these circles or non-circles, so that we can combine them together with a number and letter and the circle or non-circle. The sharps and flats being represented by an AB for the ones that are in between A and B instead of A sharp, B flat. So it's a little bit tighter, a little bit cleaner to see from a letter standpoint. We then took a look at the modes as they relate to the collection of notes around the key of C. Those modes are going to be all the same for all 12 collections of 7 notes. We gave an abbreviation in letter for those modes. We then listed the collection of notes around the key of C over here. We have a numbering for the modes. This is going to be a permanent numbering system that we're going to apply universally no matter which modal point that we're going to be focused on. Here's another abbreviation, just the first 3 letters of the modal names. Here's the abbreviation that we gave for the letter names. And then over here, we have the half steps that we put into play. This is going to be the distance terminology that we mapped out. And then we mapped out the chords that we would be constructed off of the Ionian. and we said, okay, this would be the normal naming construction. But I would like to name it by the nodal point, so I could call it just a 3-note Ionian. I might not even need the N. It's just if the 3 is in front of the I, you can just call it a 3-note Ionian or a 3 Ionian, right? A 3-note Ionian. Or I can name it by the starting point and the distance, meaning it's an Ionian 2 modal half step, which would be 2 modal whole step, which would be 4 modal half steps, which would be the 5th scale degree, meaning you start on the Ionian to get to the last note in the 3-note collection. To skip every other note, it would be a distance of 4 modal half steps, which would be 2 modal whole steps, which would be the 5th scale degree. You can name it by endpoint, meaning it would be from a Nashville number system, a 1-5 modal range chord, or if you want to do that with letters, an Ionian Mixolydian modal range chord. So here's the distance in terms of the Nashville numbers, 1-5. Here's the letters, and then we mapped out the note half steps. We mapped out the intervals. We mapped out the modal distance, and then we gave the actual notes, and then we put them into the buckets in terms of where they would fall in terms of the normal kind of bucket terminology that we would typically use. The majors would all be in the majors. We can see that the Lydian is going to fall into the major, but it has these extensions. The Mixolydian, we have a whole nother bucket that they put together just to take care of that because the 7 messes it up. The Aeolian is going to be mainly in the minor bucket, except we do have an extension. The Dorian is all in the minor bucket. The Phrygian has 2 in the minor bucket, but it gets messed up when you get to the 9, so you have these minor extensions. And then the Locrian, you have this diminished 2 categories all to itself, and then the half diminished. So you normally see it like this as the collection of notes that would be in a normal note collection, but this doesn't give you the format that's nice to be able to know which node you're going to be building off of. All right, so that's great. Those would be the normal chords. But this time I want to say, what about the 5 chords that are outside the collection of notes? So let's say that if I'm playing in the collection of notes around the key of C, then these would be the notes. All the sharps and flats would be removed, but I could still build a chord off of the root of a sharp or flat, possibly as a leading chord to go into one of these notes that are in our collection of notes. So we could do like what's normally done in terms of the chord construction to basically name the note that we're going to be playing. So say it was, we're on the collection of notes around the key of C and we want to play C sharp. So I could make a chord, say it's a C sharp major chord, which means that I would have to shift my mind to a different collection of notes, as you normally do with chord construction under a normal convention, so that I have to renumber the whole system and see the shape on the fretboard that's different now. See, in other words, if I go over here and I'm on this fretboard, for example, and I'm building off of the C, and I'm building a shape off of the C, for example, then here's like a lean back shape on that one. But what if I wanted to have this sharp? Well, I could most likely do a parallel shape moving all these up. So then I would have to name, how would I name that? Well, instead of calling it, this one could have been called an Ionian chord, and then this one would be called what? An Ionian plus chord, or it would be a 1.5 chord. But I could call it by the note, which would be a C sharp major chord because it has a major construction, but now I'm naming it by the note point, right? I'd like to do that. Then what I'm really doing is kind of revisualizing the entire fretboard as though it shifted up to here. All the colored notes shifted up 1 to be here. Now, I don't normally want to do that because I want to memorize myself being in the same shape. I'd like to see it in relative position to the 7-note collection that I'm currently playing in and not have to switch the shape in my mind to do that. So how can I say, okay, I'm playing something that's outside the 7-note collection. I see this as the root. I'm going to call that an Ionian plus or a 1.5 or an Ionian ocean chord. Those are going to be names for this one that's in what I call the ocean. These are going to be like the continents, right? And then I can call it, I think the easiest thing to do is to say it's an Ionian major chord, or it's an Ionian chord. Or in other words, what if I moved up here and it was a minor chord? Then I could say, well, it's an Ionian plus, or a 1.5 Aeolian shape chord, right? So it's coming, so meaning it's coming off of the node 1.5, but it has the shape of a minor chord or an Aeolian shape, right? So I think that would be the nicest way to basically say it, because then you can say, I can tell you the node in relative position. It's in the Ionian Ocean. I'm building a chord off of the note that's in like the Ionian Ocean 1.5 from a Nashville number standpoint. But the shape of the chord is an Aeolian chord. So it's an Ionian 3-note chord with an Aeolian shape to it. That way I don't have to basically switch again to change the entire shape on the fretboard to visualize the shape of the chord, right? And but the problem with that is that then when I look at the modal points, I can't really count through the modal points the same way. Meaning when I build a chord off of like one of the nodes in the system, then it's easy to just say, well, I just take every other point. Meaning if I build a chord, it's going to be the 1, the 3, and the 5. If I build a chord off of this Lydian, it's going to be every other modal half step. Meaning it's going to be modal Nashville number 4, 4, 5, 6, Nashville number 6, Nashville number 7, and then around the horn to 1, Nashville number 1. But if I move this whole thing up here, so now I can say, now it's a Lydian Ocean chord, or a 4.5 chord, right? A Lydian plus chord, but I can say it has a Lydian shape, or I can say it has an Ionian shape to it, right? However you want to say it, because these are only 3 notes. You can call it a Lydian shape or an Ionian shape to build the chord. But the numbering system isn't going to work perfectly. I can still kind of name it with the relative numbering system. This would be a 4.5 chord. This would be a 6.5 chord. This would be a 1.5 chord, right? But you don't have, but the numbering system isn't going to be as clean. All right, let me show you what I mean. How can we deal with that? So if I'm going to go back on over here, and I'm going to say, let's add another column. So I'm going to add a column between D and E. I'm going to right click here. I'm going to click on that and insert. And I'm going to say, this is the numbering system that would be a relative numbering system to the collection of notes that we have around the key of C. So if it was the key of C and we're using a relative numbering system, but adding the notes that are in the ocean, it would be, well, here's the normal notes, 1, and then skip a note, whole step to 2, whole step to 3, half step to 4, whole step to 5, whole step to 6, whole step to 7, and then back to 1. Now the ones that are in the ocean, I'm going to name them by being in the ocean by putting a 0.5. So I'm going to say this is a 1.5 or an Ionian Ocean chord. I'm going to add decimals to this whole, let's do this whole column, add decimals. So I'm going to call that an Ionian Ocean chord, and then 2, and then you have a 2.5, and a Dorian Ocean chord, or a 2.5 Nashville number chord. 3, there's nothing between the 3 and the 4, right? Because those are right next to each other. And then you have a 4.5, which is going to be a Lydian Ocean chord, and then you've got 5, and then you've got 5.5, Mixolydian Ocean chord, Aeolian, and then Aeolian Ocean chord, and then the 7. So these are the 12 notes that are numbered from relative position perspective based on the collection of notes that we're in. Now the problem then is, if I build something off of the 1.5 chord, I can't just take every other note in the collection of notes, because that system is built off of the idea that we have 7 notes that are going to be rotating around in a circle. So the shape will be the same. So I can say, yeah, I'm building a chord off of the 1.5 node, and it has the shape of an Ionian chord, right? It's a C, it's a major chord. But I can't just say, well, I'm going to take every other modal half step, because now I built it off of one of the modal half steps that are in the ocean. So normally that's not really a problem, because if you're playing on the guitar or something, you're going to know the shape, and so you'll be okay with that. But if we want to technically list out the modal points, that becomes kind of an issue, right? But I think that's the easiest way to deal with the naming convention. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'm not going to change the collection of notes. I'm going to build a chord off of the collection, off of a note that's outside the collection, like this 2.5, and I'm going to call it a 2.5 chord. So it's going to be a Dorian ocean chord, a Dorian plus chord, but maybe it has the shape of an Ionian, a major. So it's an Dorian ocean chord, major shape chord, right? Dorian ocean, Ionian shaped chord. And so that way I can name the shape, right? This one would, if you're building something off the 4.5, it's a Lydian plus, Lydian ocean, 4.5 chord, but maybe it has an Aeolian or minor shape. So 4.5, Nashville number 4.5, or Lydian ocean chord with an Aeolian shape. And so then you build it like a minor chord, right? Off of the ocean note. Okay. So that's going to be the general idea. So then we have, I want to add then another naming convention here. So I'm going to insert another column on I, right click and insert. And I'm going to make this H a little bit longer. And wait, no, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to put here, we have Ionian. So I'm going to add down here, this is going to be equal to the Ionian. And then I'm going to say and then brackets plus. So if I say it by long name, this is the Ionian. If I name this point, I'm going to call it Ionian plus. You could also call it Dorian minus. We end up with this problem with the two names thing again. But I'm gonna try to name it one way, going Ionian plus chord, and then this is going to be a Dorian plus. So this is I can just copy this and paste it here. That's a Dorian plus, Lydian plus, Ionian, mixed Lydian plus, Aeolian plus. And then with a short name, I'm just going to say it's equal to this I, and then once again, and brackets for a letter, for text, a plus, and then brackets. So once again, I'm going to call that an Ionian plus, a Dorian plus, a Lydian plus, mixed Lydian plus, Aeolian plus. So that gives me my ocean notes. Let's make these the orange ones. Let's extend that orange out here, so we can see the ones that are in the collection, and then all the pluses are outside the collection in the ocean. And traditionally or conventionally, I'm going to name it by the one to the left, right? So I went to the left, going to the right on the number line or the fretboard would be the Ionian ocean or Ionian plus, which number-wise would have a 0.5, Nashville number 1, Nashville number 1.5. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the Ionian, this whole thing, and I'm just going to add the 5 other collections of notes that can be built off of the note. So I'm going to go all the way over here, copy that, and then I'm going to go down. We did the Ionian, Lydian, Mixolydian. We started with the majors first and then the minors. I might just put this one in order of Nashville number order, but I'm going to paste this down here. So now we're going to add the 5 that are outside the collection. So I'm going to once again call this Ionian plus. So this is going to be equal to, I'm going to scroll up to that Ionian, and then I'm going to say and again, and then brackets plus, or quotes plus. Yeah, that's right. So it's an Ionian plus chord. And this 4, it needs to be not a 4. If I'm on the collection of notes of the C, this is going to be a half step up from the Ionian. So whatever I'm on, if this is equal to this 4, it's got to be that 4 plus 1. So it would be 5, which means it would be a C sharp. It would be in the ocean for the collection of notes around the key of C. So, but I want to make this so that it doesn't go over 12. So if I made the Ionian to be like note 12, then this needs to be a 1. So let's do it this way. I'm going to say this equals if tab, copying this, copy. If that is less than 13, so it goes up to 12 but not past 12, comma, then do that. If not, do that minus 12. So in other words, if I'm in the collection of notes of 12, which is G sharp, then this is going to give me the 1/2 step up, which would be an A in that case. Let's go back to our normal 4 up top. Let's make this black. Okay. So now we've got Ionian plus. This is going to be a C sharp chord, and that's correct. And then over here, where's this coming from? This needs to be that Ionian plus. So I'm going to look up this Ionian plus and return the relative position, which should be a 1.5. So I'm going to say this is going to be X lookup, and I'm going to look up that I plus, comma. I want to find that up here in this collection. So that's why we added all the ones that are in the ocean. And then comma, return to me the Nashville number related to that in this column. So it's going to find that I plus, hopefully, and give me the 1.5 Nashville number for the Ionian Ocean or Ionian plus chord. Now I need to add a decimal here so I can see it. Add in the decimal, so 1.5. Okay, so there is that. So now I have to go through here and say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, instead of doing a 3-note chord, a 4-note chord, a 5-note chord, 6 and 7, I'm just going to do the circumstance of a 7-note chord all the way down so we can see the longest, most complicated chord that we can build. In other words, if I'm building on the Ionian Ocean chord, I could make it I could make it a standard chord shape that would be either the Ionian through the Locrian, right? I can build a standard normal chord shape, Ionian through Locrian chord type shape off of this node. And for each of those shapes, I can make a 3-note chord, a 4-note chord, a 5-note chord, a 6-note chord, or a 7-note chord. So I don't want to add all of those because then I'd have to do examples of, 5 times 7. But instead, let's do the most complicated one so that we can see it. So I'm gonna say that then we're gonna say that this is gonna be the shape of the chord. So this is going to be the shape, meaning I'm going to make it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to add 6 and 7. That's going to be the shape of the chord. So I'm going to build it off of the Ionian plus, and then I'm going to use the shapes of a standard Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, or Locrian shape on it, making a 7-note chord for each of them, just assuming they're all 7-note chords. All right, so let's delete this stuff for now. Well, let's delete, is this doing what I wanted to do? Let's delete this for now. Let's delete all this for now. And let me think about this. We're going to say, okay, so what would we call those chords? Now, on this chord construction, I can't really say that I'm just going to make a 3-note, no, I can't really say this one. Like where I'm saying, look, I'm building it off of, in this case, the Locrian node, and then I'm telling you the distance to get to the last point. That works with normal chord constructions if all of the notes that you're adding are within the 7-note collection. But in this case, I'm starting with a root that is outside the 7-note collection. So I can't say start on the note that's outside the 7-note collection and then take every other note, every other modal half step that's within the 7-note collection, right? What I can do is I can say, look, it's going to be a 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7-note chord that's starting on this ocean note outside the 7-note collection, and it has a shape that's a standard shape, Ionian, Dorian shape. So I could use a convention like this. I'm going to say this is going to be a 7-note Ionian, and then it's going to be, and then I'm going to say it's an Ionian plus chord, and then it has an Ionian shape. Or I could make a 7-note Ionian chord, it's an Ionian plus chord, but it has a Dorian shape, right? Or I can say I'm going to make a 7-note Ionian plus chord, but it has a Phrygian shape. Now I could make it not a 7-note. That 7 is standing for the number of the 7 is standing for the number of notes in the chord. I could make it a 3-note chord, a 4-note chord, a 5-note chord. I'm just doing the most complex one. So when we map out the points, you'll see the most complex, format of it. So I could make it, so I'm just going to say a 7-note I plus chord that has a Lydian shape to it. It's a 7-note I plus chord that has a Mixolydian. It's a 7 Ionian plus chord that has an Aeolian shape. It's a 7-note Ionian plus chord that has a Locrian shape. So I think the easiest way to say it is like, don't change your perspective. If I go to the fretboard, if I'm looking at this collection of notes, don't change the perspective if I'm building a chord off of here, so that you now are changing your mind to visualize an entire different collection of notes, but rather just recognize I'm building something off of the note that's in the ocean, which has a shape that is a standard shape. In this case, an Ionian shape. If this was up here, you're going to say now it has a Aeolian shape or a minor shape. And you can most likely use just terms of Aeolian and Ionian, or major and minor. But if you have a more complex shape, like you're going to add the 7, then it would be a Mixolydian. You might have a Mixolydian type of shape that you're going to be moving up, particularly in a bluesy kind of thing. So it would be nice to have all 7 kind of standard shapes that you can then you would just know it by shape, right? But if you had to count it out, if I have to actually count out the shape on the fretboard because I don't know how to build it, then you might have to change the collection of notes to that perspective, or you could look at it from a relative perspective, and we'll take a look at how to do that. So you could map it out that way. And so those are that's the idea. All right. So now I'd like to be able to say this so it pulls in this up here, and then maybe converts this to an Ionian. That should be an Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian. So I could say, let's try to build this out this way. Let's try to rebuild this one. So I'm going to say it's going to be a 7-note, and then I'm going to say the Ionian plus needs to come from here. So it's a 7-note. So this equals a 7-note, and I'm going to say, and this Ionian plus, boom. So that does that. And then I want to make it add an I, but I want to convert that to an I. So I want to say equals X lookup. Let's test it out over here. I want to find that 1, comma, find that 1. And I could just find it like, let's do the same collection of notes in this collection of notes, and then return this. So it's going to find that Ionian. It's going to find this 1. Wait a sec. I did it backwards. That's going to be backwards. Let's try it again. Equals X lookup. I want to find this 1, comma, find the 1 in this collection of notes, and then comma, return, then this Ionian. It's going to find that 1 and return the Ionian. Boom. Okay, so now I just need to put those two together. I'm going to double click. I'm going to make this an absolute reference, F4, 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 so that those two don't move. Enter. So we still have that. I'm going to double click. I'm going to copy this whole bit, enter, and go into here and say it's going to be that and that. Boom. So now I've got a formula that does that for me based on this and this. So I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to copy this whole bit. I can copy the equal sign even this time. I'm going to copy that whole thing, copy, enter, and I'll put that right there. Boom. And now I should be able to copy that down. And so, oh no, que paso. Double click. This cell moved down. I don't want that cell to move down. So I'm going to say, that's this one. So this one needs to be F4'd. F4, try it again. Copy it down. Boom. There it is. Muy B to the N. Muy B to the N. So that's the way I'd like to be able to say it, right? It could be a 7-note, a 3-note, or whatever, but I'm basically building an I plus chord, an Ionian Ocean chord, or but I'm going to make it an Ionian shape, or a Dorian shape, or a Phrygian shape, or Lydian shape, which again I'm going to know on the fretboard by just shape typically. Okay, but so then I can't really name it. I can't really name it by the ocean chord by distance, by modal half steps or modal whole steps, because again I'm starting on a note that's outside the collection, so it doesn't really, so you can't really go, so I'd have to name it just by this convention generally. I could still use a modal range convention, but again it's not quite as useful if you're looking at a note that's outside the collection, because you can't just skip every other note to get to the endpoint of the modal ranges. But it's possible to do that, so I kind of want to like map that out. You could still like name the starting and ending point and look at the relative positions. So let's think about that. Now let's first. So I'm gonna come back to this. This will fix itself once we fix this bit. So let's work in here. Let's work in here for now. So I'm gonna delete this here, and let's think about the normal name of this chord. So if I was going to name this chord normally, I'm saying, okay, look, I'm building a chord that's in the ocean. It's an Ionian plus chord. It's an Ionian ocean chord, but it has the shape of an Ionian chord, right? So what would we call that? That we're building it off, in this case, of the collection of notes around the key of C. It would be a C sharp chord, which I'm representing by a CD, meaning C sharp or D flat chord. And it would be just a normal major, in this case, a major 13, because we're saying it's a 7-note chord to make it the most complex chord. So I could say, basically, this is going to be equal to, if I go up top from the Ionian node, it's equal to this one that we built out here. It's a C major 7-note chord, C major 13 chord, except that C is not a C, it's a CD or a C sharp or D flat chord. So what I want to do is be able to convert this. So I'd like to say, find that chord up top, but remove this C bit, and then instead add this in front of it, and then that's what I want it to do. How could I do that? So first I'm going to say, let's double click on this and say, I'm going to say, all right, I want you to take the right of that, and then and then I'm going to say comma, and then I want you to count, which is LEN, the characters of that, count the characters of that, and then say -1, remove one of the characters. So that will remove the front bit. So now I've just got a major 13, and so now I want to add this to the front. So I'm going to say, okay, that's cool. Now I'm going to go into this and say, I want to put that in front, and then tie it to what I already have there with an and, tying it in, boom. So now I've got a C sharp or D flat, or a CD is what I'm calling it, major 13, right? Okay, what if so what about this one? This is an Ionian ocean chord, but it's a Dorian shape. So what would I normally call that? Well, that would be a Dorian, that would be a C sharp still, but it's a Dorian. So from a normal naming convention, I'd say, okay, let's find the Dorian up top, which this is an order of Ionian, then Lydian, the mixed Lydian, the majors. But then here's the Dorian down here. I'm going to add the 13, so it's a D minor 13 chord, but I don't want it to be a D this time because I'm building this whole thing off of the note that is the Ionian ocean chord, the I plus chord, the 1.5 chord. So I want to do the same thing. I just want to say, okay, let's double click on this. And we're going to say, I want you to pick up the right of that, copy that, and then say comma, the number of characters is going to be LEN, count the characters, in other words, of that, close it up, and then subtract 1. That's the number of characters we want. And then we're going to say, close that up, boom. So there it is. We got rid of the D, double click on that again, and we're going to add the front bit, which is going to be that, and then an and. Bam. Same thing here. So we're in the Ionian Ocean, an I plus chord, but this time I want it to be a Phrygian chord. So I'm going to say, let's find the Phrygian chord up top. Say, where's the Phrygian? Where's the Phrygian? There it is, muy bien. So a 13 chord has an extension for a Phrygian because it has the difference that 9 is an issue. So we're going to say, okay, that's cool. So I'm going to say then, I want to double click on this and say I want to take the right of that, copy that, bam, and then comma, and number of characters is going to be len, count the number of characters, but then subtract 1 from that number of characters. That removes the front bit, and then I'm going to go in here again and say pick up that on the front, and then and enter. All right, and so this one's going to be an Ionian Ocean chord, 1.5 chord, but it's going to have a Lydian shape. So let's go to the Lydian chord up here. If it was a 7-note Lydian chord, there's the Lydian. We would have to have an extension because the Lydian has that sharp 11, which is like the augmented 4th, right? So I'm going to say, okay, enter. So I want to get rid of the F, so I'm going to double click on it once again and say take the ones from the right of it, and then I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to say comma, characters will be len, count all the characters of that, close it up, -1 character, that's the number of characters, close it up, enter. Now that looks good. We remove the front bit. Now I'm going to put in front that CD and enter. Boom. Now this is going to be, once again, Ionian Ocean chord, I+ chord, but it's a Mixolydian shape. So let's find the Mixolydian 7-note chord up top. Mixolydian. So that's going to be just the G13 shape for Mixolyd because it had its own convention. So we're going to say, all right, let's double click on that again. Say we want to take the right of that and then copy that and then say comma, len, paste it, close it up, -1. That gets rid of the G in front. So we just get the 13, double clicking on it so we can put the C sharp, D flat, or the CD and to tie it together. All right, 2 more times. Moss, copy. Let's copy the format painting and say now we have a 7-note Ionian plus or Ionian Ocean chord or 1.5 chord with an Aeolian or Nashville number 6 shape built off of it. So I'm going to say, all right, it's a 7-note Aeolian. Let's go and copy the Aeolian format up top. Aeolian. So we had to have an extension of the 13 on that one, even though it's the main minor shape. Double click on that to get rid of the A up front. We're going to say this is going to be right tab. Copy that. Copy, comma, len, tab of that. Close it up, -1 to count the characters. Close that up. That removes the A from the front of it because I want to put the C sharp in front. So we're going to say let's put that C sharp in front and then to tie it together. Uno vez más, one more time. We're building an Ionian Ocean chord, but it has a Locrian diminished shape to it. So I can just say, all right, it's a 7-note Locrian for the most complex Locrian. So here's the normal Locrian, which would be B for the collection of notes around the key of C, but this time I'm going to be building that shape around the Ionian Ocean or the C sharp D flat. So I'm going to get rid of the B in front by going into here and say that we want to take the right of that, copy that, comma, len, tab, paste, close it up, -1, close it up, enter that. Oh, wait a sec. I went too fast. Demasiado rapido. This needs to be len, not left. And then I go back in here one more time and say this is going to be that, and bam. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. All right, let's make this format paint. So that's going to be the idea. Now these chords now, if I go all the way to the right, we can say where do they fit in our normal extensions? Because this time I listed them out not by the number of notes that are in the chord. I have the most complicated chords for all of them, a 7-note chord, but I'm building them from each of the collections of notes. So let's see so in other words, if I had my normal buckets over here, I'm going to format paint this down. Where would the first one, which was it was an Ionian Ocean, but it was a 7-note Ionian Ocean, Ionian type or major chord. that would normally go in the major bucket. It would still fit in the major bucket, even though it's a 7-note chord. No extensions are needed. So I'm going to say this one would normally fit here. So even though we're using a note outside the collection, it still fits in the major bucket when you categorize it this way, right? What if you built something off of, this is representing now the Dorian, and this is going to be, let's just delete this. This is a Dorian. It's a 7-note Dorian chord, we're going to say. Notes, so 7 notes, let's say. And the Dorian, ironically, weirdly, let's say, fits in the minors, even if you have a 7-note chord, whereas the Aeolian, the major scale, does not. So funnily, as you would not really expect, that one fits into the minor bucket. So it still fits into the minor bucket, even though we're building it off a chord that's outside the 7-note collection. Notice how that's not really helpful. This table's not really helpful to tell you, that chord is outside the collection. It would be nicer, it's actually more helpful to call it an Ionian plus. It's more helpful to say it's an Ionian plus or Ionian ocean chord, or a 1.5 chord that has a Dorian shape. Why is that more helpful? Because then it tells you the shape of the chord, and it tells you that you're building it off of a note that's outside the collection. Isn't that more useful functionally within the function of what we're trying to do here, which is like to make music and communicate within the context of making music, right? And so now this one is going to be a Phrygian. The Phrygian has an extension, so that's a minor mode. It's a 7-note Phrygian, which is the most complex Phrygian chord generally, under the normal chords. So you're going to say it's going to have an extension. So it's going to be a minor extension. It's in this bucket out here, under the normal naming convention. But the normal naming convention doesn't tell you that note is outside the collection of notes, right? It's just said, right? It doesn't give you any context, really. If it's a 4-note Lydian chord, Lydian is a major mode, right? But if I add the Lydian, it's going to have a major extension because the Lydian has that augmented 4th or augmented 11th. So it's going to be in a major extension category over here. And then what about a Mixolydian chord? Well, the Mixolydian chord is a major chord, but it gets thrown off right after the 7, so they gave it its own bucket, basically. Everything falls into that bucket except for a triad. So it's going to fall into the Mixolydian or dominant 7 bucket. So we just give it that CD7 or C sharp D flat 7. What about an Aeolian chord? You would think, even if it's the most complicated 7-note Aeolian chord, it would still fit in the minor category, but it doesn't. The Dorian fits in there, and if you add the 13 to the Aeolian, you have to put it into the minor extension category, which is kind of unusual. So it would be over here. And then if you build a Locrian chord, if it's a 3-note Locrian chord, it gets its own bucket for the diminished. And if it's anything over a 3-note, it has its own bucket. So it has 2 of its own buckets just to deal with the Locrian chords. But this is going to be a half diminished chord generally over here. So that's going to be the general naming. So this is how you'd have to name, in essence, the 5, types of like chords that you can build off of the one note that's in the Ionian Ocean. But again, notice that these names don't really give you the context. They don't really tell you. You have to know that it's outside the collection of notes by the note name. It's a C sharp or D flat major 13 chord, right? It's a C sharp or D flat 13 chord. You have to know that note is outside, and then you're kind of, when you're visualizing that, what are you doing? If you tell me it's a C sharp 13 chord, then I'm like, oh wait, I thought I was playing in this collection of notes, but now I have to reposition my mind to say I'm building something off of this collection of notes, right? And so I have to shift up the whole pattern in my mind, instead of just saying, oh, I'm just going to recognize this as a note that's outside the collection of notes that I'm using as a pass-through, not note, but a pass-through chord. And I'll just make the shape from that perspective. See, functionally, I think that's actually a better way to do it, in my opinion, right? Because then, like if I tell someone it's a C sharp 13 chord, they have to know that that's going to be outside the collection of notes and then build it like it was a dominant 7 chord. Whereas if you tell them it's an Ionian plus or a 1.5, an Ionian ocean chord that has a Mixolydian shape, right? Then that gives them all the context, right? We're still looking at the music from the perspective of the collection of notes, in this case around the key of C. We're going to build a chord outside the collection of notes that's we're looking from, but we're using a shape that's a conventional shape. That's again, you can argue against it. Like, again, I'm sure a lot of people will have a argue against that, but I still think functionally that would be the way to go. Anyway, so anyway, we're going to continue. So next time I will take a look at the modal points from that perspective, which gets complicated, and again is not something I think you would do in practice as much, because in practice I'm just going to look at it by shape from that point on whatever instrument you're in, whether that be a guitar or a piano. I think it would work similarly either way. But we can map it out from the relative perspective. So in other words, I could still map this out as though I changed the entire shape so that then I can look at it just like we do in scale degrees. But the problem with that, you're changing the shape. We could map it out from the perspective of the collection of notes that we're in, even though we're using notes that are in the ocean. It's going to be ugly to do that. It's not as nice, but it's functionally possible. And so I just want to show that. So we'll see how that maps out next time.